The ballroom was a galaxy of shimmering silks and glittering jewels. But for Lady Alara Vance, it was a cage made of light and sound. She stood near a marble column, her gloved fingers clutched around a glass of untouched lemonade, praying for invisibility. At 23, she was firmly on the shelf, a forgotten book with a damaged cover no one cared to open. Her mother had insisted she attend. "You must make an effort, Alara," she had said, her voice thin with a familiar disappointment. "We cannot afford to keep you forever." The words, meant to spur her into action, had only pressed her deeper into her shell. Her worth was a calculation of dowry against defect, and the latter always won. The defect was a web of scars that traced a path from her left shoulder, down her arm, and across her back. A permanent whisper of the fire that had nearly claimed her in childhood. She kept them hidden beneath high collars and long sleeves, but she felt their texture against the fabric with every breath. They were a secret geography of ruin that defined her entire world. Tonight, the whispers of the ton felt louder than the orchestra. She saw the pitying glances from the mothers of debutantes, the quick, dismissive looks from eligible gentlemen who sought perfection. Laughter died like a candle running out of air whenever she drew near a group. She was a ghost at the feast, a reminder that life could be cruel and imperfect. Resignation had become her closest companion. She expected nothing, hoped for nothing. Her future was a long, grey corridor leading to a quiet life as a spinster aunt, dependent on the charity of a brother who barely tolerated her presence. It was a bleak tapestry, but one she had accepted. Then, the music seemed to falter. A hush fell over the chattering assembly, a wave of silence that washed from the grand entrance inwards. Every head turned, every fan paused its gentle flutter. Alara followed their gaze, her curiosity a tiny spark in the ashes of her despair. He stood framed in the arched doorway, a figure carved from shadow and ice. The Duke of Alistair. Alistair Beaumont was a man spoken of in hushed, fearful tones. He was impossibly wealthy, ruthlessly powerful, and as emotionally remote as a winter moon. His face was a mask of aristocratic indifference, his dark eyes missing nothing. He never attended such frivolous events. His presence was an anomaly, a disruption to the predictable orbit of their society. He moved through the parted crowd with a predatory grace, his gaze sweeping the room as if searching for something, or someone. Alara shrank further behind her column, a mouse hoping the hawk would not see it. But the hawk's eyes were sharper than she could have imagined. They settled on her, a direct and unnerving focus that made the air catch in her throat. For a dizzying moment, she was certain he was looking at someone behind her, a more worthy subject of his attention. But there was no one. The space around her had become a sudden, stark vacuum. The Duke of Alistair began to walk towards her. Each step was deliberate, measured, closing the distance between them with an unnerving purpose. The whispers erupted again, now frantic and questioning. Why was the formidable Duke approaching the forgotten spinster, the scarred and silent Lady Alara? He stopped before her, so close she could see the flecks of silver in his dark eyes. He was taller than she had realized, a towering presence that blocked out the rest of the ballroom. He bowed, a crisp, formal gesture that was both impeccably polite and utterly terrifying. "Lady Alara Vance," he said. His voice was a low baritone, smooth and cold as riverstone. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. She could only manage a slight curtsy, her knees trembling beneath her gown, her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of panic and confusion. Words failed her. She could not fathom what he could possibly want with her. "I believe you are unattached," he continued, his gaze unwavering. It felt as though he were peeling back the layers of her carefully constructed defenses, seeing all the way to the frightened girl hiding within. She swallowed, finding her voice at last. "Your Grace," she murmured, the words barely audible. "That is correct." The Duke gave a single, sharp nod. The air crackled with a tension that was almost palpable. The eyes of the entire ballroom were fixed upon them. Then he said the words that shattered her world into 1,000 glittering, impossible pieces. "Good," he said, his voice devoid of any discernible emotion. "Then you will marry me." It was not a proposal. It was a command. A declaration of intent delivered with the same cool authority he might use to purchase a new estate or a prize stallion. A collective gasp swept through the room. Alara felt the blood drain from her face, a sudden chill seeping into her bones. She stared at him, convinced she had misheard, that this was some cruel, elaborate jest. But his expression was deadly serious. There was no hint of humor in his eyes, no flicker of mockery. He simply stood there, waiting for her response, as if the outcome were a foregone conclusion. Her mind reeled, trying to grasp the sheer absurdity of the situation. The most powerful, sought-after man in the country had just proposed marriage to her, the social pariah, in the middle of the season's most crowded ball. Her silence stretched, thin and fragile. She could feel her mother's frantic stare from across the room, could almost hear the frantic calculations spinning in her head. This was salvation, an impossible, terrifying salvation. Why? The word escaped her lips in a choked whisper. It was the only question that mattered. A muscle twitched in his jaw, the only sign of any internal reaction. "My reasons are my own," he stated coolly. "I require a wife. You are suitable. The arrangement will be beneficial for your family." He laid out the facts like a business transaction, cold and precise. He was offering to solve all her problems, to lift her from obscurity and ruin, and in return, he wanted her. She looked into his unreadable eyes and saw nothing of the warmth or affection that was supposed to accompany such a question. She saw only an iron will, a relentless determination. This was not a courtship, it was an acquisition. Yet, what choice did she have? To refuse would be to condemn her family and seal her own bleak fate. To accept was to step into a different kind of cage, a gilded one, but a cage nonetheless, with a warden she did not know or understand. She began, her voice trembling. "I accept, Your Grace." The words felt alien on her tongue. The Duke of Alistair gave another curt nod, as if she had just agreed to the time of a meeting. "My solicitor will call on your father in the morning to settle the arrangements," he said. Without another word, he turned on his heel and strode from the ballroom, leaving a wake of stunned silence and frantic speculation behind him. Ilara remained frozen by the column, the forgotten lemonade glass still clutched in her hand. The world spun around her, a dizzying carousel of shocked faces and incredulous whispers. She had just become the future Duchess of Alistair, and she had never felt more alone or more terrified in her entire life. The weeks that followed were a blur of formalities. The Duke was true to his word. His solicitor descended upon her father's modest townhouse with contracts that were shockingly generous, erasing the family's debts and providing a future for her siblings she could never have dreamed of. She was a pawn in a game she did not understand. but she was a valuable one. She saw her betrothed only a handful of times. He would call upon her, always impeccably dressed, always maddeningly remote. They sat in her family's worn parlor, a foot of air and a universe of silence between them. He would inquire politely about her health. She would answer just as politely. The conversations were stilted, empty things, like two strangers forced to share a train carriage. She studied him during these tense meetings, searching for any crack in his marble facade. His hands were large and steady, his posture rigid. He never smiled. His eyes, when they met hers, were like looking into a deep, still lake. She could see her own reflection, but never what lay beneath the surface. He was an enigma, a puzzle she lacked the pieces to solve. Her mother was ecstatic, fluttering around her with plans for the wedding, oblivious to Alara's bone-deep anxiety. "The Duke of Alistair," she would exclaim for the 10th time in an hour. "Who would have believed it? You have saved us all, Alara." Alara felt less like a savior and more like a sacrifice. One afternoon, as they sat in their customary silence, he broke the routine. He placed a flat, rectangular box on the table between them. It was wrapped in simple brown paper. "For you," he said, his voice as neutral as ever. Hesitantly, she reached for it. Her fingers fumbled with the string. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, lay a set of exquisite charcoal pencils and a thick, leather-bound sketchbook. Her breath caught. No one knew of her secret passion for drawing. It was the one private solace she had, the one place where she could create a world of beauty that was untouched by her own imperfections. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with a question she did not dare ask. How could he have known? For the first time, she saw something shift in his expression. It was a flicker of something. Not warmth precisely, but a subtle softening of the hard lines around his mouth. "I was informed you had an artistic inclination," he said, the explanation feeling entirely inadequate. It did not explain the thoughtfulness, the sheer precision of the gift. "Thank you, Your Grace," she whispered, her fingers tracing the smooth wood of a pencil. "They are beautiful." He simply inclined his head, and the moment was over. The mask of indifference slid back into place. But the crack had appeared. A tiny fissure in the armor that showed her there was more to this man than the cold, ruthless duke the world saw. It was a disquieting thought, one that planted a seed of curiosity in the barren soil of her fear. The wedding day arrived like a sentence to be carried out. The sky was the color of a fresh bruise, heavy with unwept rain. Alara stood before the mirror in a gown of ivory silk, a stranger staring back at her. The dress was magnificent, a creation of lace and seed pearls that had cost a fortune. Its long sleeves and high, intricate collar were her own design, a beautiful prison to keep her secret safe. Her mother fussed with her veil, her hands trembling with excitement. "You look like a duchess," she breathed, her eyes shining. Alara felt like an imposter. The ceremony was a grand, impersonal affair in a cavernous cathedral. She walked the aisle on her father's arm, her gaze fixed on the imposing figure waiting at the altar. Alistair was dressed in stark black, a severe and commanding presence. He turned as she approached, his face as unreadable as ever. She stood beside him, her hand trembling as he took it. His grip was firm, his skin cool. They recited their vows, the ancient words echoing in the hallowed space. Her voice was a fragile thread. His was a steady, resonant tone that seemed to make the very stones vibrate. When he slid the heavy gold band onto her finger, A shiver traced its way down her spine. It felt less like a ring and more like a manacle. The reception was held at his London residence, a mansion so vast and opulent it felt more like a museum than a home. Elara moved through the throngs of guests in a daze, accepting congratulations that felt like condolences. She danced the first dance with her new husband, his hand resting formally on her waist, his movements precise and practiced. They did not speak a word. It was during this ordeal that Lady Beatrice Finch approached them, her smile as sharp and unpleasant as a shard of glass. Beatrice had been the season's reigning beauty, and she had made no secret of her ambition to become the next Duchess of Alistair. The Duke's choice of Elara had been a public humiliation for her. "Your Grace," she purred, her eyes flicking dismissively over Elara. "And the new Duchess? How quaint. I must confess, we were all so surprised by your choice. One would have thought you would seek a bride of more robust quality." The insult was veiled, but its target was clear. She was alluding to the rumors of Elara's frailty, the whispers that had always followed her. Elara stiffened, the familiar shame washing over her. She prepared for the humiliation, for her husband to ignore the barb, to remain as detached as he always was. Instead, Alistair's hand tightened ever so slightly at her waist. He turned his head slowly to fix Lady Beatrice with a look of pure ice. "Lady Beatrice," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "I chose my wife for her singular quality, a concept with which you are clearly unacquainted. It is called substance. Now, if you will excuse us, you are blocking my wife's view of the orchestra." The dismissal was so absolute, so withering, that Lady Beatrice paled. She stammered a hasty apology and fled, her composure shattered. Elara stared up at her husband, her heart pounding. He had defended her. He had called her his wife with a possessiveness that was startling, and he had praised a quality in her that no one had ever bothered to see. His face was still a mask, but his eyes, when they briefly met hers, held a flicker of protective fire. The crack in his armor widened, and for the first time, she felt a dizzying, terrifying flutter of something other than fear. It felt, impossibly, like gratitude. The evening finally drew to a close. The last of the guests departed, their carriages rattling away into the night, leaving the great house in an echoing silence. A stern-faced housekeeper, Mistress Albright, appeared to guide Elara to her chambers. The ducal suite, her new rooms, her marital bed. A cold dread, sharp and suffocating, settled over her. All day, the public spectacle had been a distraction. Now, there was nowhere left to hide. The reality of her wedding night loomed before her, a terrifying precipice. The chambers were breathtakingly luxurious, decorated in shades of deep blue and silver. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the silk-panelled walls. Her lady's maid, a quiet girl named Anna, was waiting to help her undress. Elara stood rigid as the girl's nimble fingers worked at the countless tiny buttons of her wedding gown. With each undone button, her panic mounted. The dress was her armor, her shield. Beneath it lay the truth of her, the flawed and damaged skin she had spent a lifetime concealing. She thought of her husband, the cold, perfect Duke. What would he do when he saw her? Would his face register disgust, pity? Would this entire bizarre arrangement shatter the moment he laid eyes on her imperfection? The heavy silk gown pulled at her feet, leaving her in her chemise and corset. Anna moved to unlace her, but Elara stopped her with a frantic gesture. "Leave it," she said, her voice tight. I will do the rest myself. You may go." Anna curtsied, her expression carefully blank. and slipped from the room, closing the door softly behind her. Alara was alone. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering despite the warmth from the fire. She looked towards the large, canopied bed, its covers turned down invitingly. It looked like a sacrificial altar. She could not do it. She could not let him see her. Not yet. Not like this. Her mind raced, searching for an escape. She spied a dressing robe of thick velvet laid out on a chair. Grabbing it, she pulled it on, belting it tightly. Another layer of defense against the inevitable. Her gaze fell upon the adjoining door, the one that surely led to his chambers. Just then, she heard the latch click. The door swung inward. The Duke of Alastair stood there. He had removed his formal coat and waistcoat, leaving him in a stark white shirt and dark trousers. The less formal attire made him seem larger, more real, and infinitely more intimidating. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, and for the first time, she noticed the faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes. He paused in the doorway, his gaze taking in her form, huddled in the heavy robe. He did not move closer. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken anxieties. Alara's heart felt as though it would beat its way out of her chest. This was it, the moment of truth. "You are cold," he stated, his voice a low rumble. It was not a question. "No, Your Grace," she lied, her voice a thin whisper. "I'm quite well." He took a step into the room, and she instinctively took a step back, her fingers tightening on the lapels of her robe. His eyes followed the movement, and a strange expression flickered across his face. It might have been pain, or perhaps regret. It was gone before she could be sure. "Alara," he said, using her given name for the first time. It sounded foreign, and yet strangely intimate on his lips. "You need not be afraid of me." His words were meant to be reassuring, but they only heightened her terror. Afraid of him? She was afraid of his reaction, of the revulsion she was sure she would see in his eyes, the disgust that would confirm every ugly thought she had ever had about herself. "I am your husband," he continued, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. He took another slow step forward. "I will not harm you." "Please," she choked out, backing away until the back of her legs hit the edge of a chaise lounge. "Do not come closer." He stopped immediately. He stood perfectly still, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. She could see the confusion warring with something else in his gaze, something she could not name. He was the most powerful man in the country, accustomed to immediate obedience. Her defiance, born of sheer terror, seemed to throw him off balance. "What is it?" he asked, his voice laced with a raw edge she had never heard before. "Tell me what frightens you." The truth burned on her tongue, a bitter, shameful poison. She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes, blurring his formidable shape into a dark, hazy outline. She could not say it. She could not give voice to her own ugliness. He let out a long, slow breath, a sound of profound weariness. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration that was so unexpectedly human it startled her. He looked not like a cold, ruthless duke, but like a man at the end of his tether. "I knew this would be difficult," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "I am not a man who inspires trust." He looked at her then, his eyes dark with a deep, aching sorrow. "I have handled this all wrong. The proposal, the silence. I am a fool." Alara stared at him, bewildered. This was not the reaction she had anticipated. There was no anger, no impatience, only a strange, self-deprecating despair. He finally moved again, but not towards her. He walked to the fireplace, resting one arm on the marble mantelpiece and staring down into the flames. His back was to her, a wall of white linen pulled taut across broad shoulders. "I will not force you, Alara," he said quietly, his voice resonating with a finality that stunned her. "Not tonight. Not ever. This will be a marriage in name only, if that is your wish. You will have your own rooms, your own life. You will want for nothing. All I ask is that you remain my Duchess. That is the only bargain I will hold you to." Her mind struggled to process his words. A marriage in name only. He was offering her an escape from the one thing she feared the most. Relief washed over her, so potent it made her feel weak. But it was followed by a sharp, piercing sting of confusion. Why? Why would he go to all this trouble, marry a ruined spinster, only to demand nothing from her? It made no sense. Summoning a sliver of courage from some hidden reserve, she found her voice. "Why did you marry me?" she asked again, the question no longer a whisper but a clear, trembling demand. Alistair remained silent for a long moment, his shoulders tensing. The firelight flickered across the hard planes of his face when he finally turned to look at her. The mask was gone. In its place was a raw, aching vulnerability that stunned her into silence. "Because I have been in love with you for 10 years, he said. The words fell into the quiet room like stones into a frozen pond. Alara could only stare, her lips parted in disbelief. It was impossible. He was mistaken. He was mad. He did not even know her. "You don't remember me," he said, a sad, knowing smile touching his lips for the very first time. It transformed his severe features, revealing a glimpse of the man he might have been. "I would not expect you to. I was just a boy. A different name, a different face." He pushed himself away from the mantel and began to unbutton the cuffs of his shirt. Ilara watched, frozen, her fear replaced by a disorienting wave of utter bewilderment. He rolled up his left sleeve, his movements slow and deliberate. And she saw it. Circling his forearm was a scar, a burn scar, old and silvered with time, shaped like a cruel, jagged crescent moon. It was a mirror to her own secret marks. Her breath hitched. A memory, fragmented and hazy, flickered at the edges of her mind. The fire, the terrifying heat, the choking smoke, the splintering crash of a falling beam. She remembered screaming, trapped, and then a face. A boy, a few years older than her, his face smeared with soot, his eyes wide with terror and determination as he pulled her from the flames. "It was you," she whispered, the realization dawning on her with the force of a physical blow. "You were the stable boy, the one who pulled me out. The boy who had vanished immediately after. The boy her family had never been able to find to thank." "My name was Alex then," he said softly, his gaze fixed on her face, searching. "My mother was a governess. We were dismissed the next day. They feared my presence would be a reminder of the trauma for you." He rolled his sleeve back down, hiding the mark, but she could still see it imprinted in her mind. He took a hesitant step towards her. "I never forgot you, Alara. I spent years making my fortune, reclaiming a title I never wanted, all so I could be in a position to find you again, to make sure you were safe. His voice was thick with emotion. The polished duke stripped away to reveal the earnest boy he had been. "I watched you from afar," he confessed, his voice dropping to a raw whisper. "I saw how society treated you, how they overlooked you, and I saw your strength, your quiet grace. I saw you." He stopped a few feet from her, his hands clenched at his sides. "When I heard your family was in financial ruin, that you might be forced into a marriage with a man who would not value you, I could not allow it. But I am a coward. I did not know how to court you, how to explain. So I did the only thing I knew how. I used my power. I bought you, like a prize. And I have terrified you." The whole world had tilted on its axis. This cold, intimidating man was the boy who had saved her life. This empty, transactional marriage was the desperate, clumsy culmination of a decade of silent devotion. Everything she thought she knew was wrong. Tears streamed freely down her face now, but they were not tears of fear or shame. They were tears of a profound, earth-shattering release. He did not see her as damaged. He saw her as the girl he had saved, the woman he had loved from a distance. She finally understood. His coldness was not indifference, it was a shield against his own overwhelming feelings, against the fear of rejection. He had been just as afraid as she was. Slowly, her trembling fingers went to the belt of her robe. She untied it, letting the heavy velvet fall open. She did not look away from his eyes as she shrugged it from her shoulders, letting it pool at her feet. She stood before him in her thin chemise, the firelight catching the silvery tracery of scars on her shoulder and arm. She was exposed, vulnerable, and for the first time in her life, unafraid. Alistair's breath caught, a sharp, ragged sound. His eyes traced the marks, but there was no disgust in his gaze. There was only a deep, wrenching pain and an infinite tenderness. He slowly raised his hand, as if asking for permission. She gave a slight nod. His fingers, so gentle she could barely feel them, ghosted over the scarred skin on her shoulder. His touch was not one of pity, but of reverence. It did not burn. It soothed a wound far deeper than the one on her skin, a wound she had carried in her soul for years. "They are a part of you," he whispered, his voice hoarse with unshed tears. A part of the girl who was brave enough to survive. He looked up from her shoulder, his eyes meeting hers. "This is my promise to you, Alara," he said, his voice resonating with the force of a sacred vow. "I will spend the rest of my life showing you that you are not damaged. You are whole, and you are everything I have ever wanted." That was the promise that changed everything. It was not a promise of wealth or status, but a promise of sight. A promise to see her, truly and completely. In that moment, she did not see the powerful Duke of Alistair. She saw Alex, the brave boy covered in soot, and she saw the lonely man who had built an empire just to feel worthy of her. She reached up and cupped his face, her thumb stroking his cheek. "You saved me then," she whispered. "And I think, perhaps, you have just saved me again." He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch like a man starved for warmth. When he opened them again, they were shining with a love so profound it took her breath away. He lowered his head and gently, reverently, he kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, but of homecoming. It was a soft, chaste press of lips that spoke of years of waiting, of shared pain, and of a future that had suddenly, miraculously, bloomed with hope. A year later, the grand ducal mansion was no longer a cold museum. Sunlight streamed through windows that had once been perpetually draped. illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The echoing silence had been replaced by the sound of laughter, a sound that was still new and precious to them both. Elara sat by the large bay window in the morning room, her sketchbook open on her lap. She was drawing her husband as he sat across from her, reading a letter. The severe lines of his face were softened now, relaxed in the easy comfort of their shared life. He would look up occasionally and catch her eye, and a slow, genuine smile would spread across his face. A smile that was reserved only for her. He was no longer the cold, unreadable Duke. He was Alistair, her Alex. He was a man who brought her tea in the morning and listened intently as she spoke of her day. He was a man whose hand always found hers when they walked in the garden, his touch a constant, warm reassurance. He had kept his promise. In every glance, every touch, every word, he showed her his love. He had taught her to see herself through his eyes, not as a collection of scars, but as a woman of substance and strength. The shame she had carried for so long had simply evaporated, burned away by the steady warmth of his devotion. She no longer wore high-collared dresses, unless the weather called for them. In the privacy of their home, she wore gowns that showed her shoulders, and Alistair would often press a soft kiss to the scarred skin there, a gesture of love that never failed to make her heart swell. He folded the letter and set it aside, his gaze finding hers. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice the familiar low baritone that was now her favorite sound. She smiled, tilting her head. "I was thinking about how a single moment can change a life," she said. "A boy in a fire, a duke in a ballroom." He rose from his chair and came to her, kneeling by her side. He took her hand, the one that did not hold a pencil, and brought it to his lips. "And I was thinking," he said, his eyes full of the love that had remade her world, "that my life only truly began the day my wife was brave enough to show me her scars." She knew then that true freedom was not the absence of chains, but the choice to show your vulnerabilities to another and have them be seen not as flaws, but as proof of a life bravely lived. Their love was not a fairy tale of perfection, but a real and lasting bond forged in fire and secrets, and made stronger by the quiet, patient healing of two souls who had finally found their way home.